Welcome, everyone. We are ready to start a new chapter in the book, The Path of the Righteous Gentile, by Chaim Klorfin and Yaakov Rogalski. We are currently up to chapter 10, which in my edition is page 96, the limb of a living animal. As usual, much or most of the text in this chapter is taken from Maimonides, the Rambam, in the Laws of Kings, where he discusses the 7 universal Noachide commandments. And as is oftentimes the case, and I repeat myself over again, that some of what they say here, some of what they're writing, is definitely the case with regards to a Jew, and they presented that it applies to a Noachide as well. I am not disagreeing, but I just want to put it out there that one may beg to differ. Not that I am disagreeing, though. We're going to see, I don't want to have to be repetitive, so I don't want to say what we're going to read, but for the most part, I think it's fair to say that most opinions maintain that this particular commandment of the limb, the prohibition of the limb of a living animal, which in a sense is number 7 of the 7 commandments, because originally, when these laws were given, not to Noah, but to the first man that was created by Hashem, by God, Adam himself. So originally, according to most opinions, he was only given 6 commandments. And at the time, it was forbidden for man to consume any living creature. Basically, you have to live off of vegetation, fruits, vegetables, and things of that nature. Animals, in any way, shape, or form, were forbidden for man. And that changed after the Great Flood, after the Mabul. Then, when God reiterated the commandments to Noah, he then also permitted eating the animal kingdom, and then he gave him this commandment, the prohibition against eating a part of an animal that was separated from the animal while it was still living. So in that regard, chronologically speaking, this is commandment number 7. If you want to speak in the theology, in the idea, so commandment number 7, of course, naturally would be the one positive commandment of setting up courts of law, because basically that commandment is saying you have to have a system, a legal system that's going to uphold at least the 6 commandments. So number 7 is the positive one, to make courts of law. So that's why that would be the last one. But chronologically and historically speaking, from in the Torah and the Bible, this is the 7th one after we had all 6, including the ones of setting up a court of law. But we're going to see that there's another opinion to that. And then, in general, when there is a dispute or a disagreement or an argument amongst the rabbis, amongst the sages, amongst the codifiers, so oftentimes we have a clear ruling, and therefore the argument remains academic. But at times there is room to be strict if the individual chooses to be so. In other words, this is what the law is, and we present it and say, here, this is permitted. However, because there's a different opinion, if one chooses to personally follow that opinion, that's acceptable, and that may even be commendable, but not necessary. All right? And now let's see it inside. Page 96, beginning of chapter 10. 1. There is some discussion as to whether or not the prohibition of eating the limb of a living animal was originally given to Adam, the first man. One opinion states that it was included in the original commandment forbidding the eating of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Remember, that's the first commandment that we have biblically right after they were created, and they were in the Garden of Eden. So they were commanded that they may eat from any fruit of all the trees that are in that Garden of Eden, with the exception of one tree. That's the tree of knowledge, that they may not eat from its fruit. According to this opinion, Adam was clearly given vegetation for food, as it is written. And God said, behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed, which is upon the face of the whole earth, and every tree upon which there is fruit of a tree bearing seed. To you, these shall be for food. Genesis 1:29. So it's very clear that he's told this is your menu. This is what you may eat. What grows in the ground, what grows on trees. So, was not forbidden to eat meat, but was merely forbidden to kill animals for food. So one interpretation is that even though it says clearly this is what you're to eat, it's not coming to exclude meat, but rather it's coming to forbid and to exclude eating meat in a particular way, that the animal was not killed before the meat was removed from the animal. If the animal had died of itself, it was permissible as food. Okay, that's one opinion. What Noah was given, therefore, was permission to kill animals for food, but he was forbidden by God to eat the flesh of any animal while the animal was still alive. In other words, Adam was commanded that the only meat he can eat is if the animal died on its own. You cannot intervene, no killing of animals in any which way. That changed, and after the great flood, what God told Noah is, you now may kill animals. And so the prohibition is you cannot eat any flesh of an animal before the animal was dead. But you could kill the animal in order to eat its flesh. According to the other opinion, Adam had received 6 of the 7 universal laws and had been forbidden to eat the flesh of an animal in any manner. Only after the flood was the leniency of permitting animal flesh instituted. That's the more popular opinion. This commandment is explicit, as it is written, every moving thing that lives shall be for you for food. Just as the green herbs, I have given you everything. But flesh with its living soul, its blood, you shall not eat. Genesis 9:3-4. This does not mean that an animal's blood is its soul, and God was forbidding man to drink any blood. The vitalizing animal soul is contained within the blood. And this is what the commandment refers to. For when an animal dies, this vitalizing soul departs. The spiritual energy that makes the animal live leaves, and now what's left is just the physical blood and the rest of the animal. So long as this vitalizing soul remains, its flesh is forbidden to man as food. So we're going to discuss soon about eating blood from a living animal, meaning that the blood was removed or came out of the animal before the animal was dead. But one thing is for certain, for a Noahide to eat or drink, to consume the blood of an animal after the animal was dead, the blood that's then removed from the animal is permitted, which is not the case by a Jew. A Jew is forbidden to have any blood of any type of animal. At first glance, this commandment seems peculiarly out of place as one of the 7 universal laws. How can eating the limb of an animal take its place side by side with such monumental principles of human morality as those prohibiting idolatry or murder? Besides a few scattered sociological perversions In Africa and China, one is hard put to imagine who would even consider eating an animal's meat while the animal lives. It sounds barbaric or primitive or whatever. And yet, this is precisely why this commandment may well epitomize the spirit of the 7 universal laws. Although mankind is enjoined to obey these commandments as they appear, nevertheless, the letter of the law serves only as a minimum, a starting point, which guarantees God's favor and ensures human morality. It's a very important principle they're saying over here. The meaning, the spirit of the 7 universal commandments. In other words, don't just think, oh, it's these 7, a very short list, very easy, but the rest of everything we can do. No, it's pretty much look at the view of the 7 as the basis for how you find favor in God's eyes, and now you need to live a godly life. But if man wishes to realize his spiritual greatness, he must tap into the infinite potential of the 7 laws, using them to refine and elevate himself. So it's not like my relationship with God, if I'm a Noahide, I'm a non-Jew, if that's the case, then however I feel, whatever I feel is right. No, there's a basic 7 commandments that's the channel how a non-Jew is to connect to God. But it's not just a list of 6 things of don't. Okay, I didn't kill today. I didn't commit adultery. I didn't commit idolatry. Okay, I'm great. I'm good to go. That's just the starting basic point. And then you build your relationship and try to become more spiritual and even godly. We see here that eating the limb of a living animal serves as a hint to the potential refinement that man can attain through his eating habits and by practicing kindness to God's creatures. For a man ingests as food is absorbed in his bloodstream and in every cell of his body, and thereby becomes part of his essential being. Thus the expression, you are what you eat. The person who eats snakes and monkeys will surely be different from the one who eats nuts and berries. And the mystical teachings state that the Holy Spirit, it's called Ruach HaKodesh. It's like a sense of prophecy. According to most people, it's a lower level of prophecy, but there's actually room to say that it's even greater. But be that as it may, it's a sensitivity, and a person is very spiritual, and he can know deeper things and can know the future. That's what we mean when we say over here the Holy Spirit, not to be confused with the way it may be used in other religions. Will never rest on one who kills any creature, even the lowliest insect, purposely. Someone kills anything purposely, not for the sake of eating. That's permissible, just out of cruelty. So according to the great Arizal, that's the source for this, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, great Kabbalist, that person will not have Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit. In other words, is it permitted for Noachites to eat snakes and monkeys? And the answer is yes, so long as they were first killed. Either they died on their own or they were killed by a human being purposely for the intention of eating them. That's fine. Yet, what they're telling us here is, do you think that a person who eats snakes and monkeys will be the same type of a person, the same refined person who is in tune to spirituality as a person who eats nuts and berries? That's their argument. So according to that, one might say, okay, you know what? How about if I become a vegetarian? We're about to address that. But the idea is you are what you eat. So yes, the basic law is as long as it's not a limb of a living animal, you're good to go. But that's the letter of the law. Now try to be sensitive. And what's the spirit of the law? What is this trying to tell you? And there, each person can do his own thing, as long as we're clear about what's the law, what's permitted, and what's forbidden, and we don't go out of those bounds. Let's continue. 2, the early sages differ concerning the act of consuming the blood of an animal. The sages say that the children of Noah contend that they were never forbidden blood as food. And therefore, that is the halacha, that is the Jewish law, that's the ruling, that a Noahide may consume blood. Very different from a Jew. For a Jew, well, fish blood is fine. But other than that, pretty much we stay away from blood big time, whether it's any type of an animal or poultry, fowl. No blood is allowed. Not only that, but even, let's say, in eggs. If we see some blood, we take it out, we throw it out. As a matter of fact, that's the irony, being the Passover is coming up in less than 30 days from now. One of the famous things one of the very painful, tragic things in history is the blood libels, the famous blood libels, where the Christians primarily fabricated the most ridiculous claim against the Jews, that the Jews, in order to bake their matzahs, special crackers, the unleavened bread that we eat on Passover, which consists of flour and water and nothing else, not a drop of salt, not a drop of oil, nothing besides flour and water, which is done in a super unimaginable way. Cleanliness and speed, I can't even begin to go into it now. And then it comes out as this cracker, and that is the way we eat it. Cannot have risen in any way, shape, or form. So the blood libels claimed that Jews need to have Christian children's blood in their matzah, in the baking of the matzah. And for that reason, the Jews allegedly were to slaughter Christian children and take their blood and mix it into the matzah. That is the most disgusting, but it is the most outrageous accusation to make on many levels. But for one, no blood is permitted. You can't mix in blood of a kosher animal. Nothing to do. Human blood is not allowed. So, and because of this, though, Jews suffered, and Jews were burned at the stake because of this accusation and allegation. And even Christians even murdered other Christian children and planted them in a way in the property, in the cellars, in the basements, whatever, of Jewish people in order to frame them. Very, very sad. Very, very tragic. Those were the blood libels. Now, at one point, there are many stories about these different blood libels. So one of the stories where locally in a particular case, they realized that this obviously can't be true is because there was a non-Jew who witnessed either a woman at home or in a bakery cracking eggs, and one egg after the other she threw out, like a dozen eggs or something she wouldn't use. And when he questioned her, she said because somehow each one of these had a drop of blood, which one can find when they crack open a raw egg, had a little bit of blood. And we Jews are forbidden to eat blood, as it says explicitly in the Torah. And we saw that Jews are forbidden to, and she won't even use an egg, and one egg after the other, just threw out. So then he realized, of course, that when they made these accusations, they had to be false. Anyhow, Noachides are allowed to eat blood. If you crack an egg open and you find blood, you may eat it. Now, if you've ever tasted kosher meat or poultry, they say that it tastes much saltier than non-kosher. And the reason would be because part of the process of how we kosher meat, how we make meat for the Jew edible, it's a whole process. Slaughtering it is just step number one. And what we do is we take the meat, every piece of it, or the chicken, and we go through a process called salting in a very particular way for a certain amount of time. We wash it, we rinse it, we salt it, the whole process. And the salting, as you know, pulls out the blood. And therefore, the blood is no longer in that piece of meat. And then we can cook it and eat the meat after the blood has been removed. But it's very salty, even though we rinse off the salt, of course, but still after having so much salt. 3, the Noachite may eat the flesh of an animal that dies by itself. But there is an opinion stating that only the flesh of an animal killed through slaughtering is permissible. This is not a popular opinion, and we do not rule as such, because according to this, it has to be slaughtered the way it would be for a Jew, which means that a non-Jew would need to buy kosher meat, not because of the blood issue, but because of how else is he going to get meat that was slaughtered. But that is not the final ruling, and therefore a non-Jew is allowed to eat meat that was killed, even if it was not slaughtered, so long as you can be certain that the flesh, the piece of meat that you're having, was detached and removed from the animal after the animal was completely dead, as we're going to discuss. Page 98. 4. One guilty of transgressing this commandment is subject to punishment by the courts, which, of course, not today, but what it means is, again, capital offense, death penalty, like any other one of the Noachide commandments. Whether he eats the limb of a living animal or merely the flesh of a living animal, or any internal organ, even the smallest amount. Again, unlike the Jew, where there's a set amount that is a minimal requirement in order for the Jew to be punishable for eating non-kosher, for the Noachide, even the smallest amount is considered a transgression. The actual transgression has to do only with eating. The use of the animal's hide or any other benefits is permissible. That applies to the Jew as well. So you can have whatever you want, shoes or a briefcase or a purse, jacket, anything which is made from the hide, leather of an animal, even though that was taken from the animal before the animal was dead, you may benefit from it. The only prohibition is the eating. 5, a person is subject to punishment by the courts for eating the limb or the flesh of either a living domestic or wild animal, but not for eating the limb of or flesh of a living chicken. Although the courts do not punish for this, it is forbidden. Okay, that is Maimonides. Maimonides states that it's forbidden, but there is a difference. Now, biblically speaking, fowl, chicken, is not considered meat in the same sense. Like, for instance, for a Jew, even though you have to slaughter the chicken biblically in a certain way, but yet it's not considered meat in the sense of mixing meat and milk. Biblically, rabbinically, it is. So for the Noachite, there is a difference. It's forbidden to eat chicken of a living animal that was detached before the animal was killed, but if a person does, they don't get the punishment. It's not a capital offense. Note.
May want to mention that when it says domestic or wild animal, that refers to mammals, I think.
It's all beasts. It's sheep.
Right, mammals.
Yeah, mammals, as opposed to what?
Reptiles.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, good point. Yes, this is all mammals. Right.
Rabbi,
What?
how about whales? So, for example, Japanese eat whales, right? And is it considered a fish? The blood of the whale. It's a mammal.
Good point. Even though it's a mammal, but as long as it lives exclusively in the water, then there's no question that it's considered a fish, even though it's a mammal. So anything that that lives in the sea, many things live in the water and on dry land. But as long as it needs to live in the water, we're going to discuss fish, that's considered a fish. And now let's see what the deal with fish is. Note, animals, birds, and fish may be killed for food in any way that man deems to be efficient, and it should be done as humanely as possible. Slaughtering of animals or birds does not have to be in a ritual manner as with Jews. So even if you do want to slaughter it, which simply means to cut it by the neck, but it doesn't have to be as it's done in the case where the way the Jews have to slaughter their animals. Fish, what we're about to read now applies to Jews as well as to Noachites. Fish are considered dead legally by law the moment they are taken out of the water, even though they're still alive. But even so, one may not eat a fish while it appears to be alive, and that's not because of this prohibition, as this is a lack of refinement. And the chief reason for the giving of the 7 universal laws was to refine the nature of man. Okay, so for a Jew, it's clearly forbidden. They're taking it and applying it to the Noahide as well. I'm not sure that I agree with that, but I'm not in the position here to disagree with them. Let me just clarify what he just said, though. A fish, even for a Jew, need not be killed in any particular way. There's no ritual slaughtering for a fish. They could take a hammer and bang the fish on the head, as is often done. They can just let the fish die naturally when it's out of the water, which won't take too long. Doesn't matter. However, to eat the fish while it's still living or appears to be living when it's still jumping around, that is not the prohibition of eating something that wasn't killed yet. It's the prohibition of doing something disgusting. So for a Jew, it's very clear it's forbidden because that's considered disgusting. And they're saying that it applies to the Noachide as well, because the whole point is to be refined. And since that's disgusting, so then they cannot do it as well. But otherwise, fish, as soon as it's taken out of the water, is considered as dead. 6, when one slaughters an animal, okay, if you chose to do it that way, even if its windpipe and esophagus are severed, so long as the limbs are still moving, the limbs and the meat that are separated from them are forbidden to a Noachite because of this law. However, if one eats the limb or flesh of an animal after it has been killed, but while it is still moving, he is not punished for this by the courts, for it is not actually considered the limb or flesh of a living animal. And this is actually it's sort of a famous case where the Noachide law is stricter than the Jew. In the case of the Jew, as long as the animal was properly slaughtered, the moment, the instant after the proper slaughtering, which means, let's say by an animal, that the majority of the windpipe and of the esophagus were cut, at that moment, the animal, start cutting up the animal and then kosher it, salt it, and then cook it and eat it. Whereas by the Noachide, as long as the animal is still moving around, it is considered to be living, and he may not eat from the animal until the animal completely stops any movement. Then and only then can parts be removed. 7, whether it is a part of an animal that has meat with sinews, cartilage, and bone, such as a leg, or even if it contains no bone material at all, such as the kidneys or the heart or the tongue, it is all the same. That is, it is regarded as a limb for the purposes of this commandment, meaning a part. Let's translate the word limb, because if you're going to get strictly biological, it probably has a very clear definition, and I'm not sure this all falls into it. So let's call it a part. Simple. When we say limb of a live animal, we mean a part. All right, let's do number 8. A limb or piece of flesh that is hanging detached from its original position. So it wasn't completely torn off, because let's say the skin is still holding it, but it's lingering there, it's hanging, is not forbidden to be eaten after the animal is slaughtered. If one could have returned the limb to its original position, and the animal could have remained alive for a year. But if one could not have returned this limb to its original position so as to permit the animal to live for a year, this detached limb is forbidden even after the animal is slaughtered. Again, that would not apply to certain things. So it all depends. And again, this is taken from the law for the Jew, where if there is such a situation where there is something wrong with the animal, some blemish, something is part of the animal is hanging or whatever, and that would be a sickness that would guarantee that within 12 months the animal would die from that, then that animal may not be eaten by a Jew, even if it's slaughtered properly right now. Whereas for a Noachite, again, they're saying that basically same idea would apply. Okay, even though it's already 8:30, but let's do number 9, because it's really continuation of the one we just did. Number 9. The foregoing refers only to a limb that is actually hanging. That is, it has been dislodged from its original position and is only slightly attached. However, if a bone were broken in a place that does not cause serious damage to the animal or bird, for example, a wingtip, if flesh covers the majority of the broken limb, then the limb is not forbidden when the animal is slaughtered. If flesh is missing from the major portion of the limb, then the limb has to be removed completely after the animal is slaughtered before the rest of the creature can be eaten. In other words, that one piece can never be eaten. All right. Let's open up now for discussions. And if we still have time remaining, we can continue and finish the chapter. But so far, any questions or comments on what we learned so far? No? All right, we continue. Number 10, we're on page 99 in my edition. If an animal has an extra limb that is located in its proper area, in other words, naturally and normally, it should only have 1 or 2, whatever, of that limb, and it has an extra one. And its presence will not affect the life of the animal. Now, sometimes having an extra limb will clearly be that the animal cannot live. But if it doesn't affect the life of the animal, this extra limb is permitted and is not considered like a hanging limb. Double limbs that will affect the life of the animal, such as the stomach, liver, and kidney, must be removed, for the law of a hanging limb is applicable to them. Meaning they can't eat that extra one of those limbs. So it all depends on what type of limb it is and what it will do to the animal. Had the animal not been killed, what would be the effect of that extra piece? 11. Everything that is forbidden to a Jew because of the law of the limb of a living animal is similarly forbidden to a Noachite, except that the latter has the added strictness of being guilty of this particular transgression, whether the animal is spiritually clean or unclean. The Jew is guilty only if the animal is of a type that is spiritually clean. Okay, we're referring to the list of animals that in the Torah and the Bible, it's listed in Leviticus, and then again in Deuteronomy. We know which types of animal. They are called tehoira, which means pure or clean. And then the other ones are called tameh or tameya, which means unclean or impure. A Noahide may eat any animal as long as it's not a limb or a part of a living animal at the time that it was removed. So there's no restriction. So there's nothing forbidding a Noahide from eating pig. No problem. Horse meat, like we said, snakes and monkeys, you name it. For a Jew, though, there's a list of what is permitted and what is forbidden. So if, however, the Jew eats a part of an animal that that was a limb of a living animal, that only applies if it's the kosher type of animal. Whereas if a Jew, let's say, eats a part of a pig that is a limb of a living animal, he is not transgressing that prohibition, only the serious prohibition of eating non-kosher type. Whereas for Noachite, makes no difference whether it's a goat or a pig or sheep or a horse or a bull or a camel. It doesn't matter. Can't eat limb off of a live animal, and they're all the same. So if you read it in the Bible, don't get confused. Don't think, oh, this applies to me, because it says over here, here's a whole bunch of animals that you can't eat. No, you can eat any animal you want. Rabbits, whatever they may be, so long as it's not any part that was removed or detached from the animal before the animal was completely dead. Number 12. Animals, together with their lives, were given into the hands of mankind. The higher spiritual rank of man dictates that he not eat the limb of a living animal, even though human flesh and animal flesh are related. The one may be incorporated within the other through eating, but the soul of an animal may never be incorporated within the soul of man. The soul of an animal must first be separated from its physical being before the animal body may be absorbed within and become part of the human body. Okay, very important. Everything has a living soul. Speaking according to Jewish mysticism, everything has what we call a soul. However, they're very different. Humans are the highest level. Then we have the animal kingdom. Then we have the world of vegetation. And then finally, the things that are inanimate. Stones, earth. Now.
Excuse me, Rabbi.
Yes.
One question. And as you described this, this was something that I wasn't quite aware of. With factory farms, commonly the animals are not fully killed on the way. Most of the meat, I'd say I wouldn't be able to trust any meat that's produced via essentially the whole Gentile industry, unless I personally witnessed it being done, would pass this particular rule, which is a death penalty offense. So that basically precludes all non-kosher meat right there, unless you do it yourself, I guess.
Are you speaking in the U.S.?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know, but according to the U.S. RDA, I don't know. I'm asking. Do you know what their regulations are as far as killing the animal?
I've watched videos, and I personally don't eat non-kosher meat. I've watched videos where they have animals, they're actually sadists, and they even electrocute them and torture them, or they'll be not dead, and they'll throw them into things to like boil their, like burn their skin off, like the Chinese do essentially. And I don't believe there's any oversight. They have chickens that have their feet grow around the cages, all kinds of stuff that I even have a hard time accepting. The eggs from these chickens is a problem for me, and not even for any other reason than I wouldn't want anything to do with it.
Right.
So I feel that that's almost a death penalty offense for Noahides even.
The commercialized farms, what you may have seen may be the exception. In other words, there's the organization everyone knows of called whatever, PETA, whatever the acronym is. And they're big into anti-animal cruelty. And I mean, I don't want to get off onto their
Yeah.
that, but the point is, yes, it does exist, but I'm not sure that that's the norm. If you, I'm not sure. I'm not saying that you're
Yeah,
wrong.
yeah.
I'm questioning if a person walks into the store and there's meat that is approved by USRDA. That means that there's supervision. What are they supervising exactly? That what? They must have a list of things that they don't allow and things they do allow.
I looked into it, Rabbi. Actually, the USDA is largely paid for by the very companies that they regulate, and I would say that it's even worse than the Security Exchange Commission for its honorability. So I would say, what percentage of this abuse existing within an industry precluded? Is it 5%, 3%, 10%? So what if you know effectively that there's a guaranteed 5% rate that this is happening in the meat industry? That would seem to preclude to me.
So that's a good point, because we have a concept in Jewish law that if there is a small percentage of a chance in certain cases, then we can rely on the majority. Now, it doesn't always work. For example, in Jewish kosher food, you pretty much, again, it gets very complicated and very detailed, but
The
in
hechsher,
general,
the different hechshers.
not just that. The law, in general, you pretty much need to have 100% that it is good. You can't say, well, most of the kosher meat is kosher. That's not good enough.
That's what I assume.
But in particular cases, you can rely on a great majority. So if 5% of the meat is as you describe, which is a capital offense, but 95% of the meat in the market is fine, then you can probably rely on that, and it's not a problem. But does that mean that if you want to be more scrupulous and you want to be more careful, that you should only get kosher meat? Probably.
That's what I already do. Yeah.
Because that way you're guaranteed. Again, you're not getting it because it needs to be ritually slaughtered or because you don't want to eat any of the blood. It's just because you want to make sure that you're eating what's kosher for you. And for you to know that you can, it's got to be.
I don't like it either way. I want to eat it just on the principle of the conditions they're kept in is almost preclusive. And I'm troubled by the whole industry in general in this country and any oversight. And the only one that I think that would have any gumption would be Jewish oversight, obviously.
Well, Bob has something to say.
Well, yeah. The animal cruelty is a serious issue in the factory farms and that, or I guess in farming in general, animal cruelty has always been a serious issue. The question we're looking at here is whether whether the animal is dead when the meat's taken off. And normally, except for certain unusual circumstances, normally the meat the meat we buy at the grocery store, the animal is considered to be dead by the time it was taken off.
Even though they're doing disgusting, cruel things to the animal, which is a big problem, what Bob is saying is they don't chop off its leg, for instance, before it's dead. They may electrocute it and dunk it into boiling hot water and torture it to death. But
that's
then once
it's true.
dead is when they cut it up.
No, I watched a documentary on Food USA. It was a movie, and I couldn't watch the whole movie because I saw the conditions that they had these animals in, and I mean they were literally mauling animals while they were still alive inside of a big bins where they would march them in. Some would be dead, some would still be alive, some would be trying to climb out, and they would kill them by crushing them. So the leg might have been removed by the crusher and the animal's still alive. And this is something that is going on all over the United States that a lot of people aren't talking about. And the meat industry is trying to keep a lot of this information away from people. So what Dave is talking about, I've actually seen that in documentaries. So I don't think that they've solved it because they keep catching people doing this stuff. And that's just one point I got. The other point is that I'm curious about when you talk about the soul is in the blood. Now, we don't believe in cremation because if you burn the body, you're burning the soul too. So, I mean, the animal still has some of its soul in the body, doesn't it?
Not exactly.
First thing I would like to hear, and then the second thing you can address separately.
Okay. Well, I'm going to address what you just said now about the soul in the blood. Once the individual is dead, whether it's a person or an animal, the soul has departed from the body. And there's no problem with cremating animals. No, none whatsoever. A Jew can even do that. Once the animal is dead, you can do whatever you want. It's not disrespectful. It's not torturing an animal. Once the animal is dead, you can do whatever you want to the animal. You can make musical instruments out of parts of the animal. You can make strings. You can make shoes, whatever, all the many things they make out of the hides of animals. That's fine. And likewise, you can cremate them. Now, the human body is a bit different. Not because the soul is still in the body, because it's a matter of respect, because this contained the soul of a human being. Whereas by the animal, even though it contained its soul, but as I mentioned, mystically speaking, everything has a soul, and the world of vegetation, even a stone. But we don't have to show on a practical level any respect for the soul of a stone. You don't have to go in that regard. It doesn't show a lack of sensitivity. So too by an animal, whereas by a person it's a different story, because it's a human being and everything was created for the human being, and that's why the order of things is that people are supposed to consume meat so that the flesh of that animal becomes one with the flesh of the human being, but the soul not. And therefore, once the animal is dead, the blood is lifeless and there's no soul in the blood. All right?
I thought the restriction on cremation for Jews was for the redemption, so that they'd have their bodies.
Right, but then according to that, the question is, A, do the non-Jews also have a resurrection? And if you're going to say that they don't, then is it still forbidden for non-Jews to be cremated? And if so, why?
All right, so I'm sorry. If I was reading where a rabbi was saying that, for the Jew, burning the body would be burning his soul, and so I kind of followed that. But you bring up the thing about the non-Jew, if he's resurrected, then would it be the same? And we still don't know that, do we?
Well, for a Jew, it's so severe to have the Jewish body cremated because that's showing a lack of belief in the cardinal principle of Judaism of the Jewish people being resurrected from the dead. So that's one major reason why it's forbidden for a Jew to do cremation.
But you can't destroy the loose bone even if you do cremation.
That is correct. And that's why even all those Jews that were cremated, whether it was by the Nazis or whether it was by choice or whether it was out of ignorance, doesn't matter how and why. Every Jew will ultimately come back and be resurrected in their original body. However, if a person by choice has themselves cremated, that's showing a lack of belief in that principle. It's not like saying, well, I'm a big believer and I know that there's the loose bone. No, the entire body as it is at the time of the death has to be buried as such. even though it's true what you're saying about the loose bone. It's a matter of our attitude, or what are we showing by doing it this way or that way. And by
Okay,
the, yeah,
I'll make this quick. In addition, I was talking to my rabbi about eating alligators and things like that. And he was saying that, sometimes you shouldn't eat certain things because of the disposition of the animal. You take on the characteristics of the things that you eat.
they said snakes and monkeys as opposed to nuts and berries. That would fall into that category. For a Noachide, there's no prohibition of eating alligators so long as the alligator was first killed. Now, I don't know how much there is to eat in the alligator, but that's a separate issue.
Gross. I could do without anyway.
Yeah, you'd rather wear alligator shoes and have alligator, whatever you call it.
I could support that. But I'm not eating it.
Anyone else?
Gershom?
I have a question. Yes. I'm curious. So when an animal is slaughtered, where does its soul usually go after?
That's a good question. And I'm going to answer it as follows. I don't mean to be funny, because today, there's all these, especially for children, comics or what do you call it? Fantasizing, or where they, I don't just mean today, I mean, the past 100 years with cartoons and comics and all that, they've taken animals and given them, which animals, of course, they do have personalities, of course. The ox is cunning, and the lion is the king of the jungle. They do have it, for sure, but they've humanized them. Out of all these many, Walt Disney, really made these animals seem so humanistic. And there is no paradise for animals. There is no afterlife. All right. There's no paradise where all the dogs go to and all the cats go to and every different type of an animal. It doesn't exist. There's no such thing. There's no source that I'm aware of for such a thing. And I would be beyond shocked if someone can show me in Jewish tradition anywhere such a concept. There is something close to it, which I'll get to in a moment. So basically, what happens to it? Well, what happens to the soul of a blade of grass when it gets plucked out of the ground? It's not a soul in that regard. It's a much different, it's a lower level. Nothing. It's basically godly energy. So that godly energy just returns to where it came from, which for us, we don't have a conceptual understanding what that means. So there's a cycle, or you can make something, first it was this, then it became that. It used to be an animal or vegetable, and now it became a tree, became a table and chairs. So that changed from being the world of vegetation to being something like a stone. So then did its life force shift? I believe so. It now has a different soul, if you will. But when we say the word soul about anything other than people, other than humans, we should really put it in quotation marks. We don't really mean the same type of a soul. We mean a particular fit of a type of a godly energy to make it live. So it just goes back, like think of it as recycling. It just goes back to where it came from, so to say, which is not a paradise or something like that. Now, there is the concept in Judaism of reincarnation. And that's a very, very long concept, which I'm not going to get into now, but it does exist, and we do believe in reincarnation. For the most part, and I stress the word most because there are lots of exceptions, for the most part, human beings are only reincarnated into human beings. And for the Jews,
isn't it?
Pardon?
Isn't it if you didn't complete enough learning or something that you get sent back? Isn't that how that happens?
Yeah, but it's not really a punishment. Well, in some cases it's a punishment, but oftentimes it's not punishment. It's just to finish the job. Like, in other words, it's brought down that for a Jew, every Jewish soul needs to fulfill and keep all 613 commandments. Now, not everyone manages to do that. And
It takes a long time.
You're in a situation or in a generation where you can't do it beyond your power. Like if you're living in the time of exile, like for the past nearly 2,000 years, when there is no Beis Hamikdash, no holy temple. So a lot of times the souls come back many times, or the souls that were in the times of the temple and fulfilled almost everything have to come back. So it's a very big deal. Now,
Yeah. What about
people
souls of mamzers?
One thing. People like sensation. So there
Uh-huh.
are some stories, and they get a lot of publicity because of the sensation, but they are by far the exception. And that is the stories about how people become reincarnated into either an animal or into a seed of, let's say, a grain of wheat, or becomes a piece of bread, or a little bit of alcohol. There are those stories, and they have sources, and they're true. But those are the sensational stories, which are by far the exception. What it does say is that righteous people oftentimes are reincarnated into fish for some reason.
So
It's easy living.
so like again, like Leon Trotsky was a Jew and he died. So would he be reincarnated by God?
So again, not everyone necessarily is reincarnated, especially people that we know of the past, let's say, century or so. That may be their 10th time or their 100th time in this world, and they just had to complete something, and they did it, even though the person may have been non-observant, but there was one particular thing that he had to do. There's a number of stories, but there's a famous story of a very great righteous, the founder of the real Hasidus, known as the Baal Shem Tov, Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov. Many miraculous supernatural stories with him. So there's one famous story where a child was born to a couple, a Jewish couple, very fine religious people, and the child lived only a few months or maybe 2 years and then passed away, and they were very heartbroken. I don't recall at the moment all the details. I think they didn't have any children for a long time, and they asked for a blessing, and they finally were granted this child, and he only lived 2 years, and they were devastated. And he revealed to them, this great righteous person revealed to them that that soul was a person who was extremely righteous, and he kept everything. The only problem was that from birth, he was nursing from a non-Jewish woman because of the circumstances. So the nursing milk that he was getting for the first 2 years of his life was not from a Jewish woman. And him being as a righteous Jew, he needed to nurse from a Jewish woman, and you had the merit of having in your midst, in your possession, and you gave birth, and you fathered and mothered this great righteous person. When they heard that, that obviously gave them tremendous comfort. But we can't know that. Otherwise, we shouldn't. It doesn't even pay to wonder about all of these things like reincarnation and who was I in a previous life. It's interesting and fascinating things to what do you call it?
Extrapolate on.
Yeah, but unless
if you're a lawyer, it's lawyering.
Yeah. Okay, let's try to do one more. Oh boy, well,
Yeah.
One more is the end.
Yes.
Okay, we're gonna go a couple minutes over time because we want to finish this chapter because we're so close to it. 13, bottom of page 99 in my book. Okay, there's actually a lot to discuss about this, but let's read what they say. Vegetarian practices, including those of many religions, even some fundamentalist Christian sects, are generally spurious, and at the very least, reflective of incomplete theology. Lest one think that vegetarianism reflects enlightenment, it is important to remember that the ancient Egyptians were religious vegetarians, yet idolaters and moral degenerates in the extreme. We know they were disgusting and they were doing abominable things, but they were vegetarians. They actually worshipped a lot of the animals. There are 4 general reasons why a man will likely be a vegetarian. If meat disgusts him, or if he feels that eating meat is unhealthy, particularly in the modern age of chemicals and growth hormones. So as unhealthy as meat ever was, today it's probably by far whatever they do to the meat is unimaginable, speaking about what you guys were talking before. Or if he distrusts the appropriateness of current methods of slaughtering, which we were discussing, a person has every right to be a vegetarian. That's fine. But if he claims that it is cruel to eat meat, or he is vainly attempted to hearken back to the time of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, he denies the truth of God and places his own understanding of mercy above God's. Since God gave Noah and his descendants the right to eat meat, this right is divine. So it all depends why you're a vegetarian. If what you're saying is true of how they slaughter meat and what they do to meat and all that, and you say, forget it, I don't want to have any part of that, that's fine. But if you want to say that really meat is unacceptable, as we find in the beginning of creation, man was not allowed to eat meat, that's messing with God's plan, because afterwards he did completely permit it.
Was man allowed to eat meat, or was he commanded to eat meat?
No, he was not commanded to eat meat, but commanded when he eats meat, he may not have a limb off of a live animal. A story is told about Rabbi Shalom Ber Schneerson, known as the Rebbe Rashab, the 5th Lubavitcher Rebbe, who was strolling with his young son, Yosef Yitzchak, destined to become the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe. As they walked, the young boy idly stretched forth his hand and tore off a leaf from a nearby plant, like not even thinking, just as you're walking, just pulling off a leaf. His father reprimanded him for the act, reminding him that everything in creation has a soul, and therefore one must be careful. Now, this is, of course, an extreme. I said before, don't worry about the soul of stones. You're talking about here 2 of the biggest and greatest righteous people that ever walked the face of the earth, a father and son. If man has need for an object and can take it within the bounds that God has determined, he has a right to it, for man was given dominion over the whole world. But man has no right to wantonly destroy, even to the extent of purposely tearing off the leaf of a plant. So again, it's not a technical sin, it's not against the law, but it's a certain sensitivity. Anyway, I must end the class now. We can discuss this next week before we go on to the next chapter. If you have still things that you want to discuss with us or ask or share about this, by all means, please remind me at the beginning of next class to allow for that. All right. Everyone be well.
Thank you.
God will.
Yeah. See you.
Okay, thank you, everyone.